Okay, so Cynthia, have you already started the recording?
I just started, so thank
Okay,
you.
so welcome everybody. Since our numbers are fairly small, we will have plenty of time at the end for a discussion and any questions that you might have. I've done this in various iterations, this topic for audiences over in webinars of up to 250. So this is a much smaller group, so we will have time to personalize things and talk at the end with any questions that you might have. But I am a professor of secondary education at Cal State Fullerton, so I work with middle and high school teachers primarily. I used to teach, well, I have taught elementary school. I taught grades 6, 7, and 8, and high school, and 2-year college, 4-year college, and grad school. So I've pretty much done the K through beyond 16. So I have experience in all areas, and I've been teaching primarily online for a few years now. And I have found ways to make online text-based discussions actually really rich and meaningful. So I'm going to share a few things of what I've learned over the years with everybody. I think it'll take about 30 or 35 minutes to go through the session, and then we'll have some time at the end to talk. Okay, and my email is here. It will also be on the final slide. So if people want to follow up or you have questions, or maybe there are some things from this that you'll be wanting to actually use, I have links to some rubrics on how to evaluate quality online discussions. So you might want some of those things. If you just email me, I'd be happy to share the presentation with you that way as well. So a caveat, these are really my ideas and resources, really one teacher's ideas of what I think works based on my about 15, 18 years of teaching online experience. They're certainly not an official pronouncement of how to do this, the only way to do this. They're really just meant to be helpful. So you can feel free to adapt, to share, to reuse, or ignore anything here. It's all meant to be stuff that you can use yourselves. So quality teaching, I think if that's what we're really focused on, then we should be carefully thinking about the decisions we're making. So now that we've been forced into moving from primarily face-to-face to virtual teaching, we have to think about what does quality teaching look like? And here's one view. This one's been around for a long time. The 7 principles for good practice in undergraduate education. If you just take a look at those bullets, you're probably going to be nodding as I do that, yeah, this seems reasonable. These do seem like elements of effective teaching. And the good thing, I think, is regardless of your mode of instruction, whether you're teaching face-to-face or hybrid or totally virtually, they can all work. These 7 principles can work in online environments. So I like to use that as a frame for the fact that what we're doing online can be really high quality. So why use the discussion board or the discussion forum or the discussion tool, depending on what your learning management system calls it? So I think it's the place where the substance of the course really gets discussed. And importantly, it's the place where a sense of an online learning community can be built. And that's really important to me. I don't want my students to feel in an online setting like they're working in isolation, that they're alone. I want us to feel like we're part of a community. And the discussion board is a one tool for helping establish that. And then as an instructor online, this is the place for me to provide clarification, to answer questions, to redirect off-topic discussions. I'm teaching skills, I'm emphasizing concepts. There's a lot for me to do as the teacher. So I like to keep that in mind. It's not just for the students. I'm a very active participant in online discussions. So if you're new to these, some of the advantages of online discussions is they can happen almost anytime while you're just about anywhere. So our students, wherever they are in the world, if they have an internet connection, they can get to our virtual classroom, they can participate in these online discussions. They deepen your understanding of the course material. So they're the place for me and the students in my classes to really talk and hash out the content. They forge stronger connections with your fellow participants. So I know we've all had students who, for whatever reasons, don't want to speak up much in class, but in an online discussion, oftentimes our shy students in a face-to-face setting really shine. It's a different mode of delivery for them. It's a different way for them to communicate. They can think carefully about their ideas before they share them. And I think it helps promote critical thinking, shared cognition, higher order thinking. And if you're, as I am, a teacher of writing, it provides an interactive and an engaged audience for writing and teaching writing. So 2 ways to teach online. The way I do not suggest is shovelware, which I'm sure a lot of teachers were kind of forced into because all this happened so quickly that we needed to put all our materials online. And then the students oftentimes feel like they're just wading through the material on their own in isolation. In an emergency situation, I could see how that could happen, but when we're planning for next year and we have more time to be deliberate, I'd like everybody to think about developing learning communities. So where students are participating in instructor-guided group learning as a part of a community of practice. So here's what that means. In a community is really, really important in a face-to-face classroom setting. It happens naturally. Our students are generally, they're mingling before and after class, they're chatting, they may be friends. There are lots of ways for community to develop naturally on its own, and we don't have to do anything sometimes. But in an online setting, it doesn't happen unless we as instructors create and sustain that community. So that's one of the reasons I like the discussion board. It can help with that. So what exactly is an online learning community? I liken it to riding on a bus, only in an online community, everybody's asked to drive rather than sitting passively in their seat. So if you think about a text-based discussion where everybody's contributing, if somebody doesn't contribute, they're not really involved. They're not part of the community. They're not part of the learning. So everybody needs to be actively involved to make it work. This is a book I really, really like. I've been using it as a guiding resource for a long, long time now. If you really want to take a deeper dive into what online learning communities are all about, it's by Paloff and Pratt. It's been around for a long time. It's not expensive. It's an easy read with lots of examples. I will say the examples they share are from their online college classes, but a lot of what they're sharing could be effective K12 as well. And they really focus on the online classroom, the relationships and the interactions among people is what really is primarily generating the knowledge generation. So basically teaching and learning are happening through the relationships and the interactions among the folks involved. So this is a really good resource if you want to take a little deeper dive into online learning communities, what they're all about, and how they can be nurtured and sustained by teachers. So if you're deciding to do some online discussions, or maybe you already have, and you want to think about best practices, one thing is reading text online is at least 25% slower than reading text from a paper copy. So think about that when you are reading online, and have your students think about that when they're reading online. Short paragraphs and lots of white space are really the key to easy reading. It makes it a lot easier for readers to absorb the message. So just a couple examples here. It's the same message, the same text. One is paragraphed with some white space and the other is not. And when you're reading a lot online, the more white space you can involve or use around your text, the better, and the more readable and accessible that text is. So the numbers game, it is tough, I think, when you get above group sizes of about 25 to manage all of everybody's contributions. And so if you can, consider breaking students into groups of 10 or 12. It makes it easier for everybody to keep up with the posts. At Cal State Fullerton, we use Moodle, which we call at Cal State Fullerton Titanium. So there are ways in learning management systems that you can have the groups automatically created for you. This is a link in case you happen to be using Moodle. But if you're not, if you're using Canvas or if you're using Google Classroom or Blackboard or any of the others, all those learning management systems have discussion tools, and I think they all will automatically create groups for you if you want that to happen, or you create your own. So timing, I think of this as one of the benefits of online discussions is that they are asynchronous, meaning everyone does not have to be participating at the same time. So I give students a week to participate. In my online classes, I open each module Monday morning at 9 o'clock, and the students know that there's a very consistent schedule that guides all of our online discussions. Always by Friday, they're contributing an initial contribution, and then follow-up posts are always required by Sunday at midnight. I work with teachers in my classrooms or my online classes, and they are busy, as you all are, I'm sure, during the week. So they appreciate having the weekend to get a lot of their work done. That means that I'm working in the weekend as well because I'm an active participant. But for me, this schedule works. Whatever you decide for your schedule, I would suggest consistency. Maintain your expectations in terms of your schedule, whatever it is that works for you, because students really appreciate having a consistent format when they're coming into a virtual setting. And this is elementary through PhD. It helps to have consistency in an online setting. So we have, in terms of the role of the teacher, here are some things that I think about. I think about visibility. If we're posting and we're following up to our students and we're contributing to the online discussions, we're visible. They can see us. They know we're there. They'll take it much more seriously than if we're not there. So I think visibility might be our #1 role as teachers. We can model effective writing for our students. So when you're contributing, without saying so, you're kind of demonstrating for students the length of your posts, the quality of the writing, all those things come through in your contributions. So students always want to know, how long does it have to be? Well, if you're modeling by posting a couple of solid paragraphs every time, then without saying so, that's what your students tend to expect of themselves. Responding to students as individuals. So this is really important that everybody feels like their contributions are valued. So responding to students as individuals matters, I think. And I'm finding myself constantly asking questions, probing for depth, encouraging students to think and extend their thinking, highlighting exemplary work. So in my classes, each week I post a post of the week and send that around to the entire class as a way to, does a few things. One, it makes that student feel special. Two, it helps model what I'm expecting. And I rotate those posts of the week throughout so that most students by the end of the semester have received that exemplary student work post of the week. And then save your post to be recycled for the future, because that can save you typing time. So I'm very, very rarely starting a post from scratch. I'm usually grabbing things that I have posted in previous sections of the class and using it again. Role of the student, they also need to be visible, because if they're not contributing, then we don't know that they're there. So visibility is really important for the students as well. I'm asking that they're interacting meaningfully, they're supporting their general ideas with evidence, and they're taking things seriously. So one way to make sure that we're getting what we want from our students in an online discussion is to just focus on excellence and really strive for excellence and focus on that right up front. So I have some rubrics I'll share with you and a few more slides down the road. But the idea of focusing on content as well as participation. So the content you can see in yellow for an excellent post is highlighted, as is participation. So we want students to be contributing regularly, not just posting something in a hurry from their phone 2 minutes before the deadline. Content matters, as does their level of participation. So one way to think about building online communities through the discussion forums, especially if you're new to online discussions, is to have a low stress discussion activity, which might or might not be graded. So here's an example. One way to do that is to introduce yourself. So if you've got a new group of students and you're starting to develop community, and that's your goal, you could have a discussion focused just on getting to know one another. I do in my online classes. I have a 0 module. It's ungraded and it's the first week, and it's really designed for us to get to know one another. So in terms of modeling expectations, if you're the first to post, that's a good way to model what you're expecting from your students. And here's one, the beginnings of a post. Mine is, it's a few paragraphs, but you can see it's me welcoming the students to the class, talking a little bit about why distance education works for me, telling them a little bit about my kids, and I go on from there. But students enter that first discussion and see this post waiting for them. So I was the first to post. So a few things I've observed over the years. Successful online students tend to post early. They oftentimes craft, and I suggest they do this, their online post in a word processing program, and then cut and paste those posts into this, just score them or into the forum after running the spelling and grammar checks. So especially for a post that might be citing evidence from your course, and it's a pretty substantial meaty post, maybe it's several paragraphs, doing it in a word processing program is a good idea. It slows people down and they get to run the spelling grammar checks. The quality tends to improve when students do that. Successful students tend to be responding to others thoughtfully, and this is a big one in red. They're integrating course content into their posts. So when you're asking students to describe themselves and it's a getting to know you activity, obviously there's no course content to integrate. But when you're into the substance of the class, then we want kids to demonstrate their understanding of our content through their posts, and that's a biggie for me. They're writing clearly, carefully, they're logging into the website often, and they're keeping up with the announcements so that they're prepared and they know what's going on each week. So in terms of integrating course content into posts, we do value our students' opinions, but I want our students to be backing up their opinions with evidence. So how do we do this? How do we help our kids to do this better? Well, if we want kids, and I say kids, it could be elementary school through PhD, our students, to support their ideas using the words of others. So they're maybe quoting, paraphrasing, summarizing what they've read that week in a class. We need to show them how, and we need to give them a real audience for their thoughts and their thinking. So their online contributions are visible to the entire class. And if we are modeling for students what we expect by being engaged ourselves, that helps students see what it means to do this. So choice helps. I always give my students several choices each week in our discussions. They can respond to any of those 5 bullets, and they're pretty broad, and I tend to give students a lot of leeway there. But again, every one of those ends with, please support your thinking with concrete examples from the readings, the module resources, the PowerPoints, etc. So regardless of the choice, they need to back up their thinking with some really solid evidence from the class. Here are some tools for helping students do that. I skipped ahead a slide, so I want to go back. If you haven't ever used templates before to help structure students' writing in an online discussion, or it could be face-to-face in text-based, it could be writing papers, it could be having academic conversations, but I'll show you some templates here that can be helpful. So we're really asking kids to do something that's pretty tough to do. We're asking them to enter a conversation about ideas between you, the student, the writer, and your sources. to reflect their critical thinking. So for example, if a student has read something in a class and then is posting a contribution, an analysis of what that student has read, it's really a conversation about the ideas between the student and the author. And students have a hard time doing this. So I'm going to click into this resource. They say, I say templates, just so you can see what I mean by templates. So for example, these all come from a book called They Say, I Say, which I'll touch on in just a minute. But students oftentimes don't know how to, for example, introduce a quote. So they're trying to do an academic online post and they're not quite sure how to introduce quotes. Well, here are some templates or some sentence frames for how to do this. Or they're not quite sure how to disagree respectfully in an academic forum. There are templates here for helping kids with all kinds of different academic moves. So writing a summary, for example. These are just some of many, many templates that can really be helpful to students. And I want to get back to our discussion because here we have where they all come from, a book called They Say, I Say. And this is a book subtitled The Moves That Matter in Academic Writing. The appendix to this book are the templates we just saw and many, many, many more. So this is where these ideas are coming from. And if you were to Google They Say, I Say templates, you will find just about probably hundreds of academic structured templates to help students it gives them a skeleton to wrap their ideas around. So if you're struggling on how to help students say things in a bit more academic way, the kind of templates that these two authors at the back of this book recommend are really, really helpful. It's a weird title to the book, They Say, I Say. They Say is all about helping kids understand demonstrate their understanding of what they've read. So they understand what they say, and then once they understand what they say, they can then use those ideas in their own writing or in their own speech, and that's the I say side of that coin. So They Say, I Say templates, if you were to Google them, you'll find all kinds of solid templates that you might share with students on how to have a more academic conversation. So back to the roles of the teacher, in terms of setting all this up. Establishing guidelines and expectations up front makes all the difference. I'm going to share with you my rubric and a high school colleagues, teachers of mine, high school colleagues rubric as well. So you see a couple of models. You need to, as a teacher, choose something interesting for the students to discuss, something that they want to engage with. Be visible. So if you're active and participating, responding to several students in each discussion, the discussion will be much more robust. And then model what we expect as teachers through our own posts. So there is this idea of the gradual release of responsibility. And if you're doing this with students, it's quite a bit of work up front to get them going. But once they've seen your expectations, they know how visible you are, they know you're taking it seriously, that you've given them good feedback in those first few discussions, you can tend to slip away a little bit more so that the training wheels come off and the students are able to engage in the way we want without quite so much help from us. So a few tips, copy and paste initial responses from archived classes so that you never have to type it again. So if you're being forced to go online for the first time, you probably don't have archived classes or archived discussions that you can pull from. But once you've done it a few times, the content, for example, may not be changing semester to semester. So if you're talking about, in my class, for example, how kids learn to read, the content is the same semester after semester. So I can use posts from a previous class and personalize them and tweak them a little bit and reuse them rather than having to type the whole thing again. Initial response to every student is what I do right up front. But investing the time early will save it later. So in that first online discussion where students are introducing themselves, I do give every single student who contributes a personal response. And that helps because then the students know I'm there, I'm part of the discussion, and they tend to take it much more seriously. Being as old as I am, I have a printed class roster that I print out. And anytime I make a contribution directly to a student, I make a note on my roster so that I can see at a glance how many times I've responded to each student. And I realize quickly if I haven't responded to somebody, then in that discussion, that's where I focus my reading so that I can make sure everybody is getting responses from me in an equitable way. And then I think this is really important. Our feedback determines the quality of our students' responses. So if we're giving quality feedback on what we expect, they will tend to rise to that level. So think carefully about the kind of feedback we're giving, and I'll share with you some examples of how I give feedback. So an example of me responding to a student, here's a post from Crystal. Again, lots of white space, makes it way easier to read. And I'm commenting on the substance of what she's contributed. I'm quoting a few words that she's contributed so she knows that I actually did read it and think about it. And then I turn to a part of the post that redirects toward the entire class. So a few things to notice: the tone is conversational. The primary audience is Crystal, but the secondary audience is the entire class. So I'm responding to the Crystal's ideas, but I'm also pushing the class in a new direction. And in my classes, I always have the expectation that the students will respond, or won't respond necessarily, but will read all of my contributions. It might be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 posts in each weekly discussion, but they know to read all of mine because I'm oftentimes asking questions, turning things in a new direction. And they've learned over time that when they respond directly to me, I will engage with them. So if a student isn't getting a lot of other students contributing to his or her post, if they respond to me, they know I'll get right back to them. All right, so grading. How do we handle grading? Rubrics can help. And with the class, I always, after the first discussion, use the rubric that I share with students, and I annotate for them a strong post as a way to model for them, to the students, what I'm expecting. This makes it way easier for students to know what I'm expecting, because oftentimes they'll do, of course, the minimum. And if they see me modeling with the rubric what a good post looks like, they quickly see what I'm expecting. So here's a link over here to the guidelines and the grading criteria that I use. This is me and my college class, but I think a lot of this could be easily tailored to a K12 setting. So you might click on this, and I will in a minute to show you it in more detail, but you might be able to repurpose this in your own setting. So let me just click into this discussion, guidelines and rubric, which you of course are welcome to adapt and use and steal in any way you want. These are more guidelines for what I'm expecting. So we talk about this as a class, the value of the online discussions, how often I'm wanting them to contribute and be part of the online discussion, netiquette in terms of what I'm expecting in terms of the kind of the discourse and what counts as collegial academic discussion. So this link here to some netiquette guidelines might help you. And then on the second page is the actual, here's what matters, the grading criteria. Here's what I'm looking for. Here are the things I'm considering in your online discussions when I'm evaluating them. And then finally, the rubric, which is the third page. And I give them scores on 2 areas, quantity and quality. So the top area of the rubric are the highest performing contributions in terms of the criteria, in terms of quantity, and criteria in terms of quality. So for me, that's always worked well to give scores for both. In reality, what I do is give 1 score, and then if it's not a perfect 5 out of 5, and oftentimes it's not, I'm using the language of the rubric in terms of providing feedback on how they can improve. So that's my rubric. Here's another one from a high school colleague of mine who's teaching, and she's an online instructor at a high school in Bakersfield. This is a link to hers, and it's similar to mine. One of the things to note is that if you want students to take this seriously, that if you attach a significant amount of the course grade on to discussions, they will tend to work harder for you in that area. So consider that, how much of the class grade matters or does discussion contribute to. All right, so here after our first online discussion is I think a strong post by Julia, and I'm giving her feedback to that effect. So again, lots of white space, and this is what she reads. Only she sees this. The class doesn't. This is in our grade book, so only Julia sees this feedback. I start out with some of the things she did really well, direct her to take a closer look at the rubric in terms of the criteria I'm describing. And then for me, it's a big part of the grade is that they are referencing, discussing, analyzing, highlighting, mentioning the resources from that module, so the content. And I'm giving her some accolades for how well she did it, some suggestions for how to keep doing well in that area. And then I close with, again, a quick little positive statement at the end in terms of this being the first online discussion. I wanted her to have that feedback before we had our second. And you can see that a typical response, as Juan is receiving here, it's not drastically different. Often the feedback I'm giving for strong, typical, and developing, you can see it's generally, I'm touching on the same things, but the language I'm using has just changed slightly. Here's one for a more developing response that April posted, and my feedback to her. And if you're not posting, again, you don't have follow-ups, then I'm mentioning that here. All the criteria from the rubric are really being highlighted here in my feedback. And I'm always giving suggestions for how to improve. So typically when I take the time to give students this level of detail in that first discussion, they do way better in the second one and all subsequent discussions. So a few tips for recognizing success and hard work. I have always found good success with sharing a post of the week to publicly recognize that student's stellar work. So I email a copy of the post to everybody in the class, along with a shout out to the author and some reasons why that post was so strong. And I rotate the winners every week. So maybe at the end, when we have a chance to talk, if others have experience with online discussions, you may have other ideas on how to recognize students who are really doing well and taking this seriously. And then if you're interested in moving beyond text-based discussion, so you want to hear students, or maybe you want to have a video-based discussion, couple tools if you're not already comfortable with them or don't know about them. Flipgrid is a free program. You can use it, your students can use it, create free videos. That's another way to have a discussion. And then VoiceThread is one I use all the time. You can have audio-based discussions and you can have video-based discussions, and I use both. So we focused here on text-based discussions because just about all of our learning management systems have that built in. It's easy for us to do. But if you want to expand and hear students and see students talking, then you might try Flipgrid. You might explore VoiceThread as a couple ways to do that. Okay, so now we're at the questions time. So if folks have questions, since our numbers are small enough